personal views and opinions expressed by our podcast guests are their own and are not legal advice or official statements by their organizations. Hello, my name is Debbie Reynolds. They call me the Data Diva. This is the Data Diva Talks Privacy podcast, where we discuss data privacy issues with industry leaders around the world with information that businesses need to know now. I have a special guest all the way from Washington, D.C., Elyse Wallnutt. She is the founder of Agility Lab Consulting. Welcome.
Hi, Debbie. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, I always like to tell a story how people meet or how I met people. So you sent me an email introducing yourself, and I was really fascinated by your work and privacy and how that intersects with an acquisition pipeline for audiences and marketing, because I think that's such a hot issue right now. And you live in a city that I used to live in DC. It's kind of funny. But I thought it'd be a great opportunity for us to really chat about this. I feel like, especially anything with advertising or what advertisers do touch humans. That's who they really want to reach. And there's been so much, turmoil in a way around what's happening with Adtech and, the tectonic shifts and how OS makers are kind of forcing changes on other types of companies. But before we start, I want you to give an introduction of yourself and sort of your trajectory or your path into privacy.
Great. Well, I grew up in Colorado. So I graduated from Colorado State University and I entered into digital advertising really quickly. After college, I worked at a boutique search engine marketing agency that primarily focused on nonprofits. So I got a lot of great exposure early on to some big brand names and really getting to observe how people interacted with messaging through the lens of Google search ads and on the SEO side as well for more of that unpaid touch. So from there, I really dove in deeper into the marketing space. At that time, we were investing more lightly in things like, display advertising and whatnot. It was before the bigger investments started coming. But I got really intrigued by attribution and understanding how we credit different channels with the ultimate conversion in the advertising space. So as I moved along in my career, like you said, I live in DC now and have worked with Amnesty International, the Nature Conservancy, and some other larger political campaigns. I became really concerned with some of the controls that big tech advertisers were putting into place without a lot of guardrails. So after the 2016 election in particular, I was working at the Nature Conservancy, which is nonpartisan. And when we would do things like upload our ads into, at that time, Facebook, we would get flagged for political content because we mentioned climate change on our website. And it struck me as strange that Meta was able to arbitrarily decide what qualified as politics and what didn't, and shut certain advertisers out of the market related to that. And then on the flip side, they were saying, for unpaid content that just crops up from their communities stating things, they didn't want to clamp down on free speech. So we were seeing this kind of dual perspective of advertisers being held out of the marketplace, while they were also saying that they didn't want to repress any sort of, unpaid speech. So from there, I really wanted to spend more time with that. I went on to Center for American Progres and spent some time with our tech policy team. And really what did it was last summer, digging in when we were seeing some of our costs for advertising rise really substantially, I was looking in to see why that was happening, and became aware of some of the trickle-down impact that changes like Apple's iOS update were having on the industry at large, and wanted to find that space of helping marketers understand that data privacy is a huge value to us as humans, and we shouldn't be expecting our audiences to opt into something that we don't opt into in our personal lives. So how can we find that balance of driving revenue in a way that values explicit, informed consent and still helps us be creative as marketers and achieve our goals? So I started consulting just in the fall, and am helping organizations understand how they can get ahead of this.
Very good. Very good. So you touched on this a bit, and I've done a video if anyone cares to look at it a couple years ago about this. And this is around Apple's app transparency change that they made. So just briefly to explain to the audience. So Apple made a change, and they had actually announced it a couple months before they were going to make a change. And that's when I made the video about it. I'm like, hey, this is going to be big. People are going to lose a lot of money from this. Basically, Apple made a huge change in the way that they have advertisers interact with individuals on their phones and on their Apple devices. So basically what they did is make a lot of the advertising reach opt in as opposed to just opt out. So before, advertisers had a lot more information. They had a lot more information about the device, the person, the stuff that people did on their device, not even with their apps, just everything, like what you bought, how much stuff, how much money you spent, different things. So basically what that did, that changed, that's had a significant ripple effect through the way that people do programmatic marketing. So it's basically depreciated that signal, and it's made marketers have to work harder to be able to get people to opt in or get that trust. But then it also made this advertising a lot more expensive because these companies want to still make money, right? Even though they didn't have the data that they used to have, they want to be able to really earn that money. So we saw, and I think you and I chatted about this. It was in the news that Meta, that whatever year that was, had lost like $10 billion in revenue as a result of that app transparency change. And actually they lost more than that. But I think I saw an article around that time, within like 6 months or so, a bunch of companies that do that type of advertising, I think they said they had lost like $280 billion. So it's definitely a huge change in the way a way that the marketing is done. And I'm seeing very savvy, interesting, smart people in marketing that are trying to find alternative ways to really build trust with audiences so that people really want to receive their ads and be able to do it in a way that doesn't sound or feel creepy.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that that change with that web developer component and the deprecation of third-party cookies and that elimination has really forced us to be a lot more creative. And I keep calling it marketing like it's 2010 again, because it's so much less reliant on algorithms and third-party learning, and forces the business community to really rely on our chops and our creative instincts to understand what target audiences care about and make choices that are more autonomous.
Yeah. The opt-in, I guess one other thing about opt-in. So in the US, we're not like an opt-in country, right? So this is like very different from what we're accustomed to. In the EU, they are very opt-in, right? Opt-in and opt-out. We're very just take whatever, and then you fight your way out, or different things. So it's definitely very different. Tell me a little bit about how you're helping companies to really navigate those changes, and how that relates to privacy.
Yeah, so I think that's the biggest thing, is helping people understand what their advertising results have to do with privacy at all. So I lead workshops and subsequent consulting that helps people understand, I call it the four-step data autonomy framework. And that really brings together the components of compliance, first and foremost, which I think, coming from my seat on the marketing side, tends to get shoved over to just, the legal team or the IT team, and is not the marketing team's problem. But I think marketers need to be very much involved in the compliance conversation and things like privacy policy updates so that they're shielded well, yes, but also so that we are externally messaging how data is being released to third parties in a responsible way, so that as people are opting in, like you said, they understand what's happening to their data subsequently. And that protects, the PR lens as well, which I think is the big thing about this conversation is, as marketers, we're responsible for the brand. So how do we, taking cues from Apple, lean into asserting audience trust and gaining that so that we gain also the data that's handed to us in a consented way? So there's the compliance angle, there's the integration angle when we think about some of the analytics touch points that we're going to lose with things like third-party cookie deprecation. And then there's the strategic angle of building first-party data acquisition and thinking about the content that we can create that gives people a reason to raise their hands and say, yes, I trust you. Here's my data. And also really thinking about the forward steps of where we want to be as a brand when it comes to earning audience trust. So I tend to start with workshops because I like to bring together all those different teams I named to build that buy-in across those teams for how we're moving forward, how we're going to evaluate our third-party partners and whether they're up to snuff, whether we understand their privacy policies and agree with them, and how we assign responsibility across teams for taking care of updates, so that this isn't just a moment in time, it's something that we're thinking about consistently.
Yeah. So you touched a bit on first party data, which is kind of the holy grail of marketing. That's what you really, really want, right? So companies that can build trust with individuals, they have first party data. That's kind of the best that you could have ever hope for. If you're a third party, I heard one of my other guests who is a luminary in the marketing space for over 30 years. He called the third party data the third rail of advertising, right? So it's like, oh my God, okay, you're a third party, you have all these new obligations that you didn't have before. And then so tell me a little bit about how you're talking with people around handling third-party data. So I'll just give you my point of view. So I have clients that are third parties to bigger companies, and they are shocked when they find out that they have all these new obligations, things that they're like, well, I don't have customers in California. I said, but you have a customer who has customers in California. So that those things that are kind of flowing down from a lot of these privacy regulations touch you. So tell me a little bit about that third party story and how you navigate that.
Yeah, so I think there's two big pieces to it in my mind, which is first helping people understand what a third party is, because I think a lot of people don't realize that, when you upload a group of email addresses to your Facebook advertising account, Facebook's a third party. It's not just a tool, it's a third party. So you have to understand what it is that's happening subsequently. And then I think with Google in particular, people don't realize some of the trickle-down impacts of what's happening. So when they use tools like Google Analytics, Google then subsequently owns their data. And their terms say that they can use that for whatever purposes they want. So that data is what powers Google's advertising insights. And it's really a free-for-all, in that perspective. So it's really helping people to understand that those tools are third parties. You have to understand what happens, and you have to represent what happens to your audience. And then I think from there, it's really making sure that people understand that they need to assert really positive sentiment when it comes to making sure that people get why they should trust the organization and how they can get ahead of representing that externally.
I want to touch on something you said a bit too, and this is about kind of people using these kind of third party plugins like Google Analytics and stuff like this. So I've had conversations with people about this for a while. So a lot of times the way it used to be, advertisers like, okay, there's this cool third party thing plug-in and we can have a site do this cool thing, but they didn't really understand what that thing was doing. And we've seen a lot of people, get in trouble with fines or lawsuits or FTC things because they really didn't know what was happening with the data. And it's kind of, the issue is that it's your business to know. So, you really need to really ask those tough questions with third parties and then also have someone who understands from a technical point of view what's actually happening when you're actually using these tools. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, and I think that's the biggest part of breaking down those team silos is if your legal team doesn't understand all the ways that you're using tools, they can't do that research and inform that protected lens. So I think that that's the biggest part is making sure the full team is in the loop about how data is being released so that there can be processes built for evaluation and ongoing updating of those policies. And I think the thing that people miss often, especially when they're interpreting privacy law at a glance, is, oh, I don't make $25 million annually, so this doesn't apply to me, or, oh, I'm a nonprofit, so I'm exempted, and they, therefore ignore the law. Like you said, if they don't have constituents in California, it doesn't apply. So what I think is important for people to understand is that it doesn't just matter what constituencies you serve, it matters what constituencies your vendors serve as well, like you said, Debbie. So I think from the big tech side, when I think about digital advertising, all of Google's choices, Meta's choices, Apple's choices are informed by building their own brand reputations. And we won't get a lot of heads up about the choices that they're going to make, like with the iOS update on Apple's end. So compared to legislation in which we usually have a 2-year window to get ourselves into compliance, these things could happen tomorrow. So it's not so much about being behind, it's about taking steps to protect ourselves so that we're not caught off guard and we have an audience file of consented first-party data that we can rely upon in the future as things change.
There's a thing that I just read in the news that I wanted your thoughts on. Let me find it here. So basically, there's a telehealth company. It's called BetterHelp. I don't know if you heard about this, but they are a direct-to-consumer mental health platform, and they really started booming during the pandemic. They recently paid a fine to the FTC for $7.8 million. And what they did is they took like 7 million email addresses for people who signed up for their service, and then they uploaded it to Facebook to match it. And then they matched like 4 million people. But then now they've basically told share with Facebook that they have mental health treatment through this app. So tell me, what is wrong with that whole picture and why they got in trouble?
Yeah, so that's a very typical practice, I think, in digital advertising. And I think that's really the case study on how people don't understand that Facebook is a third party. So you are connecting some dots there when you are releasing that information. So I think it's been really interesting to watch some of these companies who have had to adjust to GDPR already if they are, serving EU constituencies. They've had to look at their email file and prove that people consented to be on it and that they consented to having their data released. And a lot of people can't do that. So what we're seeing is that organizations and companies are losing something like 50 to 60% of their email file when they go through that process of evaluating, hey, do we truly have consent? Can we prove it, etc. So I think that fine happened likely because that consent wasn't there, and when that information was released to Facebook, it came back around. So I think we'll see a lot more of that. And that's where I think, rather than waiting for your legal team to tell you, oh, hey, we got the federal US privacy law, if that happens someday, and you have to restart your email file, why not start now in terms of making sure that the people you have on file have raised their hands and said, yes, this is okay, and that you're set up in terms of form compliance and opt-ins so that you don't have to go through that in such big swoops later.
Yeah. I would say probably the message at a high level is that you need to, if you're going to take data that you've been given and transfer it to any third party, that should raise alarm with you. So there has to be more, I realize from a technological standpoint, it's very easy to do, right? But I think from a, not just a legal compliance and also a trust standpoint, right? If someone didn't say that you could share your information with Facebook, you need to really listen there. I think also another reason why this company had this particular settlement is because they were dealing with health information, right? So maybe like let's say that you transfer data to a third party and it wasn't like health related or something. You probably would have still got in trouble, but you probably wouldn't have been as much trouble because health information is considered like more protected, and we're seeing state laws really call that like health and financial information or race information out as more sensitive data. So having that, that's just more risk, right? So what are your thoughts on that?
I completely agree with that. I think anytime you're entering into a third party relationship, that's the perfect framework to be thinking about it in, is how much risk do we want to be taking on? So one of the points I've been making is, when it comes to things like Google Analytics, it's positioned well in the marketplace because it's free. So people opt into it because of that. But when we look at the risk associated with it, is it truly free? Because you're taking on that responsibility of communicating externally. You're taking on the responsibility of understanding Google's policies on an evergreen basis and updating that continually. So is it more worthwhile to be thinking about a paid tool that's already GDPR compliant and that's less beholden to future change? And my opinion is yes, we need to start thinking about ROI in a business framework from a different perspective that takes that risk calculation into account.
Yeah. I want your thoughts on zero party data. First of all, a lot of people haven't even heard of this, but I want your thoughts on this because I work with people who actually play in that space. But I want your thoughts. First of all, explain what zero party data is and give me your thoughts on how people can use that.
So zero party data is data that an individual gives you themselves. So they fill out a form, or they've, communicated with you in some way. It might be in person, it might be, it's really a one-to-one mechanism for them to give you that information directly. So when we do things like, thinking about it from the nonprofit angle, fill out an online petition or sign up for email, that's that zero party data that gives you that information flow. So I think the challenge from the business side of it is always the question of scale. How do we do this in a scalable way? So that's where I think it's important to start thinking about your content strategy really first and foremost as marketers in a brand new way. And I think the word influencer, it means so many things and it can get a bad rap based on what we see on social media. But when we think about thought leadership as influence and, utilizing your community partners as brand ambassadors, we can build some of those zero party data touch points that create that mechanism for collection. So I do agree that scale is challenging, and that's where I've tried to prepare people that, to your earlier point, Debbie, we probably will see some slowdown as we adapt to these things, and new regulation, but that's right sized. That's what we need when it comes to understanding that we are valuing our audiences and how they want their data treated.
What is happening right now that you see maybe in the news that concerns you, right? Where you're saying, oh, I don't like this new development or something that's happening or related to privacy?
So I think it's concerning when we make short-term decisions rather than thinking about the long term. So when we, make choices in terms of uploading audience data to various ad platforms or signing on for that, third-party co-op, I think that meets our metrics for the year. And so that isn't thinking about the long haul of audience reputation, brand reputation and audience trust. And I think what concerns me most is this conception, I think both internally from business teams, that we need to be hitting that, 10% year over year growth margin regardless. And the only thing externally impacting that is the economy. That's a fallacy. That's not taking into account all of the technical pieces of what's at play here. And I think we're going to need the finance side to become a lot more savvy when it comes to digital infrastructure and the ways in which that bigger sphere is changing, so that they understand it's the state of the industry and not the people in the seats that are impacting that, slower growth margin, so that we can make better projections that properly estimate what revenue is going to look like, so that we don't see what we're seeing all over tech, where, that COVID bump and some of those economic upticks resulted in huge influxes in staffing that are now being reduced. So the more that we have that more full-faceted understanding throughout upper executives, the better position we'll be.
Very good. Well, you're in Washington, so I'm going to ask you this question. So what do you think about us getting a federal privacy law in the U.S.?
I'm for it, because I think the value to a federal law is that, right now we're seeing that 5 states this year are implementing state level laws. And I think the last time I read into this, it was 22 states that are considering it. So we're going to have to comply with state laws anyways. And the problem with complying with state level laws instead of a federal law is that it's so beholden to change, and you have to know each state's perspective. So a federal law would create a lot of efficiency on that front. So just speaking from a practicality standpoint. And I think, rules are never fun, right? But they also create the basis for equity, so that we understand how data is being used, and we understand the risks at play when data is treated like something that can be weaponized and there's no penalty. And I think really it's been a long time since we've had any oversight in tech. And I think that would be a strong move, so that we're not also beholden to the actions of a few, rather than, the respect that we need to gain from many.
Very good. Very good. So if it were the world, according to Elyse, what would be your wish for privacy anywhere in the world, whether it's law, human behavior, technology? What are your thoughts?
My ultimate wish would be that I've always said that when people understood what was happening with their data, we would see some kind of reckoning. And I think that's where we're running into things right now. So my wish would be that people would take the time to get that grounding and understanding so that we had that basis to work from. And we could implement, assuming that people got that bigger picture. I think that's a big piece of all of this is that education that's missing. When people don't understand, I hit accept all on, that cookie banner. What does that actually mean? So making sure that no matter what we legislate or move toward, we create some literacy around that data transfer.
Yeah, I'm all for it. I agree with that wholeheartedly. Well, thank you so much for being on the show. It's been a pleasure. Thank you for keeping us up to date on what's happening, especially in like ad tech and these tectonic shifts that we're experiencing. But I really appreciate you being on the show. Thank you.
Thank you, Debbie. And thanks everyone for listening.
Yeah. Talk to you soon.
Bye.